The Golden Ticket giveaway has been launched, with Borders residents encouraged to nominate individuals to ride on the new line on September the 5th, when 3 special trains will leave Tweedbank, Galashicls and Stow, each carrying 160 Golden Ticket passengers. Leader of the Scottish Borders Council, David Parker.
Well, Golden Ticket Saturday is going to be a very special day. It'll be an opportunity for many Borders residents to get themselves a ticket and get on one of the very first trains that will run on the new Borders Railway. We've got 3 special trains running, one leaving Tweedbank, one leaving Galashicls and one leaving Stow. They go to Edinburgh, then they come back to the departure stations again. We promise a whole host of on-train entertainment. There'll be a number of civic receptions to go to on that day as well, and certainly it'll be a very special day. And we're very keen that Borders nominate each other and nominate the local unsung heroes in our communities to be the first passengers on the new Borders Railway.
So how's it all going to work?
Well, basically there's an application form, so you put forward a nomination of somebody, either an individual or a group who you think deserve to be on the train. You tell us why you think that they should be on the train, and we have a special panel who will look at those applications and then we'll decide. And if you nominate somebody, then your name will go into a special draw, and all those who nominate have a chance of winning one of 25 golden tickets, also to get one of those special train journeys.
The first to receive a golden ticket is David Romanus for his community work and strong links to the former Waverley line.
I had very fond memories of the Waverley line. When I went to college in Edinburgh, I used to get the train on the Monday morning and then come back on the Friday night. The trains were packed. These trains were packed at the time.
A lot of people saying it was a big injustice, the beaching cuts, etc. What are your own thoughts?
My feeling on that is, of all the railway closures in Britain, it was a closure too far. And I think that was borne out in the fact that the railway's even coming back again.
So how does that make you feel now that it is?
I'm absolutely thrilled, absolutely thrilled.
And this day, looming September, you'll be there, one of the first people on a train.
Yes, yes, I really can't wait for that to come.
Standing here at the transport interchange, which isn't far away now.
It's coming on very well. Very shortly we'll be seeing the very special silver cladding, which will be very unique for Galashicls going onto the building, and certainly things are progressing extremely well as we head towards driver training and the start of operational services in September. Big changes going on now. The signals are going in, stations are nearing completion, a lot of work's going on to make sure that the car parks and all the approach roads are being done, and certainly every week there's significant progress up and down the length of the line, and as they head really to progressing the project to the June driver training date, which is very critical.
What other news can you tell us at the moment?
Well, it's an exciting time at the moment. We've got the work going on in the transport interchange. We're hoping to be announcing some of the businesses and organisations that might be going into the new transport interchange very shortly. There's some development activity going on, and of course we're launching the golden tickets today, which is the first part of the celebrations, but we've got more to say about the celebrations in the weeks ahead.
Well, obviously the big change since 2012 is we've seen the reconstruction of the railway, and that's been an enormous project with up to 1,100 contractors on any one day working on the railway. Lots of new structures built, old structures refurbished, and we're going to see what will be the longest railway to be built in Scotland since 1901. So that was part of the thinking, and of course that period's been not without its political controversies about the nature of the infrastructure specification for the railway, the amount of double track, the amount of single track, etc. So that's been in there. But also I've been lucky over the last couple of years to come across some more archive material from the late 1960s, and that's provided some very interesting insights into more of the reasons why the route was closed, and frankly exposes the fact that it should never have been closed north of Hawick in the very first place. But, you know, it came very close to surviving the railway north of Hawick, and one of the things that came out of my research was finding the minutes for some of these crucial meetings in London that decided the fate of the railway. And that shows, for example, that the absence of two ministers at a particularly crucial meeting may have made the difference between the railway surviving or not surviving. So there's been a lot to find out through researching public archives, private archives as well, and it's been great to find new material in the last 3 years. I thought it was very important to start primarily from the Beeching report in 1963, although I do, and this is unlike the paperback edition first time round, I now talk about the first century of the railway, from Victorian times right through until the Beeching report in 1963. So that's some additional material, because really to understand why the railway closed in 1969, you actually have to go back to some of the origins of the railway way back in the 19th century. So there's a fantastic linkage there that I wasn't really aware of myself until I started the research. And I've also had a chance to speak to Councillor David Parker, the leader of Scottish Borders Council, about some of the political tensions over the last 10 or 20 years. And, you know, David's had to tread quite a delicate path between two sides, the supporters of the railway on the inside and the campaigners on the outside, all with the same objective essentially, but not necessarily always agreeing on all the detail of what this railway should involve. It has to be said, over the last 2 or 3 years, campaigners have found it pretty hard going trying to deal with Transport Scotland, the Scottish Government agency. There was a time when they were really quite open-minded and constructive, but they seem to have closed ranks in the last few years. And that's posed difficulties, and I think it's led to frustration on the part of campaigners, because we're seeing a railway delivered that's not really as good as it might have been. I think it's regrettable that the way the railway's been designed, and this really goes back to the original feasibility study in 1999-2000, is there's very little spare capacity for trains other than the ScotRail service, really other than in the evenings and on Sundays. So you're potentially excluding a big market for tourist charter trains coming from English cities, luxury land cruise trains like the Royal Scotsman. And there is a worry as to how you squeeze this in without affecting the reliability of the service. So I think it's going to be difficult. Some ScotRail trains, I think on Saturdays, probably in the middle of the day, will have to be cancelled to accommodate charters from the south. But these charters will bring in a lot of economic benefit to the borders. But it's a difficult balance, and the railway is not as flexible as really it should have been.
I think everyone's getting really excited about the railway coming to the Scottish borders. After 45 years, we're finally seeing rail transport in the Scottish borders again. So as you can imagine, lots of work going on to look at how we can make these opening celebrations a really, really memorable experience. And we're trying to hit not just national coverage, but actually have an international profile for what we see as absolutely central to the future of the Scottish borders. But within that, we also know that we really want to make this a set of celebrations that local people are involved in, and that local people can get a real sense of celebration and satisfaction for their communities as well. You can imagine everybody would love to be on those first few trains that run on this new railway line, the longest new railway line since Victorian times, I think. And so the demand is likely to be absolutely huge, and we were trying to find a way of making it fair for people. So a golden ticket approach, where people actually nominate other individuals, seemed like the fairest and most open way to do things, because although there are going to be 3 trains running on the golden ticket day, the Saturday the 5th of September, there's only 160 tickets for each of those trains. And so of course we don't think that'll meet demand, but we think this is the fairest way to do things. The council just approved yesterday at its meeting a Borders Railway Celebration Fund. And what we're hoping is that communities across the borders, not just along the railway corridor, but communities from across the borders will take the chance to apply for a grant to actually help make celebrations happen at that weekend, but also further on into the year as well.
It's interesting to reflect that so much of what we're getting now really goes back to the original Scott Wilson report in 1999-2000. A lot of the elements of it got set in stone, and while there were many good things in the Scott Wilson report, and it's led on to what we're going to get today, there were some strange omissions. They looked at all kinds of different options about where the railway should terminate. And the one they didn't look at, surprisingly, was Melrose. And Melrose, the hotspot of borders tourism, a couple of miles beyond Tweedbank, they didn't look at going just to Melrose. I think that was unfortunate. They didn't look at an express service from Edinburgh to Gala and Tweedbank, not making so many stops in Midlothian, and a separate inner suburban, more frequent service out to Gorebridge. And that's a very common pattern of operation for railways out from major cities in Britain. But they didn't look at that, and we still don't know why they didn't look at it. And I think that was a loss. And then coming up to more recent times, it was always envisaged that it was going to be a single track railway with passing loops, and that's fair enough. I think all campaigners accept that. There's not enough traffic for it to be double track throughout. But when the specification was coming through about 10 years ago, it was only going to be 9.5 miles of double track out of the total new build of 30.5 miles. And a lot of us felt, well, that's not enough in terms of the reliability of the service and the buffer you need to make sure it's reasonably reliable. And at that stage, there were some very visionary people in Transport Scotland, and effectively they agreed with campaigners and said, we need to squeeze out the amount of double track, and that'll enable us to have a faster and more reliable service. And that happened, but then, of course, it got cut back again. So we're in this situation where the infrastructure is very tight, and then we had really the scandal that thereafter Transport Scotland decided that all the new road over bridges over the single track sections of the railway would only be built to single track rail width. So if we want to build a double track railway in the future, or extend the existing loops, it's going to cost vastly more than it would have done if all this had been done while the railway was being built. And it's a classic example of penny wise, pound foolish, and I think there are going to be regrets about that in the future. Has to be said, it's not just a problem with the Borders Railway, it's kind of almost like a British disease, this short-termism. But it's ironic when you see elements of the railway have really been pared back, and yet this railway scheme also involves building 10 kilometres of new roads in the likes of Heriot and Fountainhall, and of course the new way underneath the Edinburgh City bypass. These new roads have been gold-plated, they've been built to the best national standards, and yet key elements of the railway have really been pared back. Now, that's just not sensible, but that's the way the world works at the moment, I'm afraid.
The Scottish Borders Business Forum open meeting for Borders businesses was well attended, plenty of interest shown and a number of speakers on hand to deliver information. I'll be bringing you a flavour of the meeting over the next few episodes, starting with Abellio's Mike Kean, who began by giving the assembled a little background on the Dutch company who will run trains in Scotland for the next 10 years.
We are the private arm of the Dutch Railway. We are owned 100% by the Dutch Railway, and a lot of what we do and our ethos and approach comes from the Dutch Railway. And that ethos and approach really centres around railway as being a community service. Railway is providing a vital utility to communities, and obviously railway being a massive enabler of growth, prosperity and the ability for people to move. We have at the centre of our company values and ethos connecting people from door to door. So it's not just about the railway, it's about further outside of the railway. When we looked at the bid, we recognised very clearly, and we were told very clearly by Transport Scotland and the stakeholders that we engaged with, that Borders was extremely important. And it was extremely important to start it well, but also to sustain that growth. And what you see both in the blueprint, but also in the launch event, is a good start, and it will be a good start. But what we're very focused on is keeping that growth sustained. And for us, that means doing the basics right, running a good, regular, high-performing service. And then once that's established and running, pushing the borders of the railway, the Borders Railway, further. And there's a few initiatives which I'll talk to you about how we do that. The first thing to say, what trains will be running? Everybody seems to ask me what trains will be running, so I'll run you through it. We're running diesel units. We're running 158 diesel units. They are a very good outer urban commuting stock. One of our key challenges with Borders is that balance between tourism and commuter, between the local community and the wider community and the tourists that wish to come to Borders. So what we'll do to that rolling stock is we'll refurbish it. We'll move it into what we call a tourist specification. So it will feel spacious. The seats will align with the windows so people can see the view. Most of you that will travel on railways, normally when you look out the window, you either don't have a window because your seat's not aligned with it. And we find that's a really key, unique in making it feel like a different experience, raising the experience of that journey. We'll have more space for luggage. One of the key things we do is we take the staff that will be on that train and we retrain them. And we retrain them in a very specific way. We retrain them to be what we call tourist ambassadors. So they become educated about the local region, that they can give out leaflets and information, and as they become more proficient, they can give out recommendations and talk about the local area and talk about the attractions. Most tourists, when they travel to Edinburgh, are there for between 2 and 4 days. Most tourists, when they travel to Scotland, want to have an out-of-city experience. It's extremely difficult in Scotland to go to the Highlands. It's a day trip at absolute minimum, and if you go by rail, it's probably an overnight trip. Borders is an amazing opportunity to capture that tourist market and to give people an experience that's manageable in a day or a half day, depending on what they want to do. And I think that's one of the unique opportunities of Borders. You will capture a huge tourist market, if it's sold and promoted properly, that want to experience the more rural Scotland, as well as experiencing Edinburgh and Glasgow and the more urban Scotland. And that, again, is a key focus for us.
In the last episode, we heard from Mike Kean from Abellio, who've been running the train service for ScotRail just over a month now. This week, it's the turn of Rob Dickson, Director of Environment and Infrastructure at the Scottish Borders Council, who started by acknowledging the disruption caused by the building of the Borders Railway in Galashicls.
There have been a vast number of short-term arrangements, diversions, etc., compounded, it has to be said, in Galashicls by other works, the flood protection scheme, and also the work that we're now doing with Scottish Gas. We did take the view that it was going to be painful and we might as well have the pain and try and get it out of the way. And it has been painful. It will continue to be a bit painful for a few months, but I think it's clear that the light is at the end of the tunnel, and the arrival of the railway and the completion of that infrastructure work should really give us a position which is unrivalled in terms of modern infrastructure for sustainable transport. We've got to look at reconfiguration of the whole bus service in the Borders in order that it fits with the railway. There's little point in having a railway if actually for the wider Borders, for those people that rely on bus services, it doesn't work and it doesn't interconnect. Through ticketing, etc., is all part of that debate, so that's all part of what is being looked at the moment. At a lower level, we've got changes to school transport because we envisage having children who will travel on the train, certainly to Galashicls, and that's a change for a generation, obviously. There's a whole piece about road signage. People want to find the stations. The stations are not signposted. There's a whole piece around road signage to be looked at, and then cycle network signage as well. So you can see from that that public service interface is quite substantial. Being no doubt the council believes a genuine desire to see a line extension to Carlisle, and the notion in the national blueprint that we should now commission a feasibility study for that extension. In my own view, it's never too early to start these things. It may take us a generation to get there, but if we start now, we've got some chance of succeeding sooner rather than later. I don't think it'll be in the franchise period. I think you're probably right. But if we don't make the case from the Borders, nobody will make the case for our behalf, and we should commence that and begin that work now.
It's not as if people didn't fight against the closure, and there's some well-known names associated with that campaign in 68 and 69, the Reverend Bryden Mabon, there's Madge Elliott, David Steele, of course, who was the MP for the area, but also some lesser-known characters who were very active. quite young individuals like Andrew Boyd, Chris Harvey and Bruce McCartney, and they all got out and did the best they could. But frankly, there was too much apathy in the background. When the official closure proposal came out, there were only 508 objections to closure of the railway, and yet more than 2,000 people a day were using the railway. So the word apathy came up in a lot of my research. I looked through the archives, and the border provosts were worried about apathy, and I think that proved right, that not enough people cared enough about the loss of the railway, or perhaps thought it was inevitable. The old Borders expression, "I bin." People thought they couldn't do anything about it. They could have done more about it, and I think if the campaign had been mounted earlier and it had broader based support, then maybe the end result would have been different. There was a lot of short-termism back then. The failure to protect the line of route from new house building at the likes of Stow, and also up at Gorebridge, and the breaches by roads in and around Newton St Boswells and Melrose, and coming further north also in Midlothian and at the Edinburgh City bypass. And that's added something like 40% of the cost of reopening the railway. The fact that central and local government did not take a strategic perspective on this and say, at the very least, well, let's protect it as a walking and cycling route, and we're keeping our options open. They didn't keep the options open, which meant the new railway is much more expensive than it needed to be. And, you know, that lack of strategic vision started in 1972, and it didn't finish until the year 2000, when part of the big roundabout at Harden Green in the A7 was constructed. So the lack of vision lasted a very long time. We've seen it's possible to overcome all kinds of barriers, some very expensive barriers, in order to get back to Gala and Tweed Bank. And of course there are barriers beyond Tweed Bank. There's the Melrose bypass, but it's only using up part of all the old railway Solomon, and indeed, of course, there's the old platform still there at Melrose. Problems around Newton St Boswells, again, because of road building. But I've walked the whole length of route, all the way from New Craig Hall, right the way down to Hoyk. Did that a couple of years ago. And once you get south of Newton St Boswells, there's really not a great deal of problem in getting all the way through to Hoyk. Some of the railway's been ploughed up into fields, but there's no really major structural problems between those two locations. And it's only just over 17 miles from Tweed Bank onto Hoyk. And we should be aiming to go there, because Hoyk is the place that suffered worst from the loss of the railway, more so than Gala did. And, Hoyk's population's been declining, Gala's population's been growing. And I think if the railway had still been there, Hoyk would have been a very different place nowadays.
The Forth Bridge is one of the most famous structures, not just in Scotland, but anywhere in the world. Billy Connolly once said that just looking at it made him feel proud, and he's not alone. England's got the Tower Bridge, France has the Eiffel Tower, but we've got the Forth Bridge, and it's been here since 1890. In well over a century, it's never had its own visitor centre dedicated to it, but things may be about to change. Recently, I spent some time at the bridge with Craig Bowman, Senior Communications Manager at Network Rail Scotland, and he told me about the exciting plans to give people the chance to get right to the heart of this amazing structure. Well, Craig, what a beautiful sight this is here at Forth Bridge, and of course it's the jewel in the crown, really, of Network Rail.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Scotland's best landmark, probably the finest railway bridge in the world. Still carries over 200 trains a day, and, from our perspective, we couldn't have a better icon for Scotland's railways and Britain's railways.
And the people back there knew how to build.
They certainly did. It's 125 years old next year. It's just gone through a 10-year refurb, which was mainly about the coating system and the paint job. But the steel work itself was in great condition. There was only minor repairs required.
Now, you mentioned 125-year anniversary, 1890 it was built, of course, all those years ago. Very soon, though, people, as well as driving over it in the train, will be able to actually go on it. Tell us about that, it's very exciting.
Well, certainly, we've got some proposals that we're taking forward at present. At the moment, they are very much just proposals. We haven't taken them through planning process yet, but certainly over the next 6 to 12 months, we aim to develop the proposals further so that we have designs that we can take to the councils for planning. We don't want to turn it into overly commercial. We want it to remain a place that people love. The part of the experience is the village itself in both South and North Queensferry. So we need to be sensitive to that. So it's not going to be Disneyland. It will be a very high-class attraction and something that we hope will be popular for Scotland, but popular for Scottish people as well as for visitors to Scotland.
People have been crossing this bridge by rail since 1890, but soon they'll be able to go on it themselves.
As the only location where the main bridge structure can be accessed by land, North Queensferry is the obvious choice for a fully accessible visitor centre. This proposal would see a discrete building created under the North Tower. An attractive shoreside walk would welcome visitors to a world-class facility that leaves no impact on the well-loved view of the bridge. With a glazed ceiling allowing visitors to experience the cathedral-like scale of this awe-inspiring structure, the centre would have ample room for eating, drinking and shopping, as well as one-off functions and events. From the main building, visitors will be guided up a step-free ramp through an educational and informative exhibition space to our lift access. Open to the elements, it will carry up to 15 people at a time on the 3 to 4 minute journey to our platform, 110 metres above sea level. The platform will provide the maximum wow factor with minimum impact on the profile of the bridge. Visitors will get the chance to enjoy views stretching from East Lothian to Ben Lomond. It would be open most days of the year and exposed to every kind of weather that the Scottish climate can offer, making every visit a unique experience. With regular passenger services and a short transfer time, we will work with train operators to ensure that visitors can make the most of this service to see the bridge in all its glory. On the South Queensferry side, we imagine a more challenging visitor experience. In this concept, we propose a smaller hub to coordinate walks on the bridge. Entirely pre-booked, bridge walks would involve provision of safety gear and guided tours by specially trained leaders. In groups of up to 15 people, you will access the bridge up a slope, providing a taster for the later climb. From here, you will walk out along the approach span using a pre-existing walkway under the track. Once over the water, the real climb begins, with groups making their way to the top of the South Tower. Daring explorers can then take in the view before heading back to the comfort of the South Queensferry hub.
Now, as a person who works for Network Rail and of course as a Scotsman himself, looking up at that structure, what does it do to you?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's better than sitting in an office, I can tell you that. It's great. I mean, this is the best part of my job, coming out here on a regular basis, and very proud to I live in the area or close by. My father and my grandfather have worked in the area, and just to think that they all saw this and felt the same pride as I do, and now to have a chance to work in it as I do, can't think of a better job personally.
Well, I'm very excited to be climbing up to the top. Tell us what's going to happen today.
We'll be accessing the bridge by hoist, which is just on the eastern face of the North Tower. It takes about 3 or 4 minutes to reach the top, where we have a scaffolding platform. It's a temporary platform, but it allows you to see great views from right over to East Lothian up to Ben Lomond. Gives you a real sense of the scale of the bridge, the incredible achievement of the engineers and the men who worked on it. And for the vision that they had to create such a magnificent structure. So it's a pretty rare opportunity. We've only probably had about 1,000 people up there over the course of the restoration period. So hopefully you enjoy it, and our other visitors do as well.
I have to say I've waited 53 years for this. Standing on the top of the 4th rail bridge, an absolutely extraordinary experience and a view that is second to none.
It really all started with Simon Longland, an architect, an old friend of mine from university, who was living in Melrose at the time, and he became more and more aware of the fact that it was a nonsense that the Borders should be the only region of Britain without a rail service, totally dependent on road transport, and he thought from an economic and environmental point of view that wasn't a sensible place to be. So Simon took it upon himself with his motorbike to cover the whole of the former Solum of the Waverley route from the edges of Edinburgh right down to Carlisle and look at the state of all the structures, how many were missing, how many were still there, and make a photographic record of it. And indeed he produced a comprehensive report which showed that while there had been quite a lot of breaches in the line, quite a lot was still there. But his big worry was that at that time there were plans to dual the A7 north of Gala, and his feeling was if the A7 was dualled, that would obliterate much of the railway, and that opportunity to have a sustainable and civilised form of transport into the Borders would be lost. So Simon did his groundwork then, and that eventually led to the setting up of a company which he formed called Borders Transport Futures. And BTF, as they were known, did a lot of work, not just on the prospect of a railway north from Gala or Tweedbank to Edinburgh, but also looked at the prospects for carrying timber on the southern third of the railway from Kielder Forest and Riccarton Junction down through to Carlisle. And BTF came very, very close to lodging plans in Parliament in Westminster for reopening the southern third of the line for timber traffic. But for a number of reasons, Railtrack pulled out, they stopped supporting the prospect. Timber prices were falling internationally because of imports from the Baltic, so their timber carrying scheme was scuppered. But BTF, make no mistake, put this whole reopening on the agenda. And then in the late 1990s, when there were more and more factory closures in the Borders, culminating with Via Systems in Selkirk and Gala, more than 900 jobs lost, the Scottish office, as was then, were able to pick up the BTF feasibility studies, take them off the shelf, dust them down, and there they had an economic regeneration project for the Borders. So that's really how it all started, how it became a mainstream project. The campaign for Borders Rail was the other key grassroots element of where the reopening campaign really got going, and that was in 1998-99. And CBR got their act together, they got out in the streets, they were chaired by Petra Bieberbach, the first chair. She came to the Borders from Northumberland, was astonished there was no railway there, and got together with like-minded people like Bill Jimson of Stow, who's been a rail campaigner ever since. They got a big petition together with more than 17,000 signatures. They got out on the streets speaking to people to persuade people that they really could get the railway back. So the combination of BTF on the one hand and CBR on the other hand meant that this railway was becoming realistic, and the mainstream political agenda was able to take it on board from 1999, and since then central government and local government have pushed it through with some strong leadership, particularly from Scottish Borders Council. In the early days, the leader of the council was Drew Tully, and he backed the creation of the railway, as did John Scott, or JR as he was known at the time, and he pushed very strongly for the railway. And then the leader of SBC has been Councillor David Parker, and David has been a doughty proponent of the railway ever since, and has helped to chart that way forward, which will culminate in the reopening in September.
many of the public have seen the railway as a mechanism of getting commuters to Edinburgh. I think it's absolutely vital that the railway is seen as bringing activity in the other direction from Edinburgh into the borders, and I see that in a number of contexts. One is potentially it'll bring tourists into the borders, taking advantage of the scenic railway itself, as well as taking advantage of the destinations at the end of the railway and located within travelling distance of the railway. Secondly, I think there are a lot of detailed business opportunities, such as we heard today in terms of web marketing, such as small transport schemes. Thirdly, I think businesses that are currently located in the borders can have the opportunity to improve their scope as a consequence of the connection to the capital. There's one business I know of that wants to find a location in the Borders Business Park because that will make it better and easier for his customers and for his suppliers to be commuting backwards and forwards from Edinburgh, and that will enhance the position of his business in the borders. And building on the last one, what I also want to see is the opportunity for businesses to locate in the borders, either their whole operation or part of their operation, in order to take advantage of that commuting link to Edinburgh. It's not for nothing that the Scottish Public Pensions Agency is located at Tweed Bank. There was seen to be a regional development advantage in terms of that public sector institution being located at Tweed Bank. I would certainly hope that Finance Services Company think about the possibility of perhaps doing some of their subcontracting or outsourcing from locations that can take advantage of the connection of the Borders Railway.
The campaign's really excited, and I think I've said before that the campaign's work really isn't done. This is we've said phase one. We really have said right from the very beginning that our ambition is to see the line opened as far as Howick and all the way through to Carlisle. Getting the line opened as far as Tweed Bank is a fantastic achievement for everyone that's involved with the campaign, and by that I mean all of the 400 members and all of the people who support the campaign. They've all played their part, and they continue to play their part, because we do have a lot of work to do. It's still a long way from Tweed Bank to Carlisle, but we're reaching for that. And whilst the fact that the railway's opening to Tweed Bank is very exciting, and we are all very much looking forward to it, and it will make a great difference for everyone in the borders. We see the focus of our work now in pushing on further onto Howick and Carlisle. The campaign does have a lot of relevant expertise and experience within its membership. We're drawn from all walks of life and from all strata of society and from all professions. And when the campaign makes a statement or makes an observation, it's not made solely from the interests of enthusiasm. It's not made solely from the interests of nostalgia. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's made with genuine insight and with genuine professional thought gone into that. And we see we have social and economic reasons for everything that we say and everything that we've tried to achieve. That's why, for example, the long and hard work that went into getting the station in Stow will make such a difference to that community. The fact that the platforms will be long enough to accommodate charter trains in Galashicls and in Tweed Bank is in no small measure due to the lobby that the campaign has put in over a number of years to make the line more suitable for tourist traffic, and bring that leisure market into the borders. There's been a lot of hurdles in getting this far, and getting through Newton St Boswells and Melrose is going to be an issue. But it's not going to be anything like as difficult as anything we've faced already. The engineers who've worked on the line have overcome some extraordinarily difficult situations. The getting underneath the Edinburgh bypass, for example, comes to mind, and the fact that the railway that was built in the 19th century simply wasn't suitable for a railway in the 21st century. And there's been a great many things which have had to be changed in order to accommodate a modern railway. So the fact that yes, there are difficulties in getting through Melrose and getting through Newton St Boswells, that I'm not under stressing them. They are going to be difficult, but they're not going to be anything that hasn't been faced on this project already.
the biggest early success was the fact that Stow Station was included in the Act of Parliament that was passed in 2006, because originally there was going to be no station in Stow, and the community there quite rightly were worried. You know, if the railway comes through here non-stop, the bus service frequency will decline, we will be literally bypassed, and what does that mean for our future? And it was very hard in the early days for CBR and Stow Station Supporters Group to get any traction with the promoter about getting a station at Stow. In fact, they'd planned on building a station beside the sewage works 3/4 of a mile from the centre of Stow, down a narrow unclassified road with hardly anybody within walking distance of the station, and that's why they projected possible passenger numbers of 5 passengers a day to Edinburgh, which was nonsense. We all felt it was nonsense. And now the station at Stow is going to be where it was originally, much more central to the village. So that's a campaign success that I think CBR and others can take credit for. Also the fact that originally the 1849 station building at Stow was going to be demolished to make more space for cars to park. And one of CBR's members, an architect, Nick Bethune, said with his staff, we can accommodate cars without knocking down a perfectly serviceable building that could have community use, and it's a reflection of the old railway. So again, there was a campaign success there. The building was reprieved. We don't know what's going to happen to it yet, but ideally it would go into community use, perhaps as a Borders Railway Museum. That might be an ideal use for it. It's just a bit of a shame that, frankly, some of Network Rail's design standards have surrounded it with a sea of concrete, ramps and walls, etc. There's been quite a lot of insensitivity in the way parts of this railway has been designed. However, we've got the station at Stow, that's important. I think the other big campaign success came when the green light was announced for the contract to be signed between Transport Scotland and Network Rail, also included the announcement that the platform and the tracks at Tweedbank were going to be extended so that tourist charter trains, 12 coaches long, commercially viable trains, so that they could be accommodated at Tweedbank. And if that happened, we would have been in a situation now where there wouldn't have been any scope for tourist trains, charter trains, steam trains, any of them to go on the Borders Railway at all. And I think there would have been an awful lot of red faces around now. So the powers that be can thank the campaigners for that. And CBR's made contact with the local authorities in Cumbria and Carlisle. They're very keen to see the idea of the railway extending northwards across the border. And I guess timber might be a very important part of that dimension. I think the critical first step, though, is to look at going from Tweedbank to Hawick. It's only just over 17 miles. Reconnect Hawick to the rail network. The town that suffered most from the loss of the railway, very important to serve that, as well as Melrose and St Boswell's too. So yes, plenty to look forward to, and the campaign is not over.
Every railway reopening, every railway project has exceeded expectations. I've no doubt that the Borders Railway will exceed expectations as well. Indeed, the ante has been raised. The former First Minister, Alex Salmond, said he expected, 7 figures, 1 million people to use the line. You know, that's a lot of people using this railway. And the railways, they generate the traffic. They open up opportunities which are lying there latent. And I don't think all these opportunities are taken into account in the raw business case to which this railway and others have been built. We know that the original specification did call for rather more double track than has been installed, and we'd still like to see that double track installed at some point in the future. The campaign is concerned. You know, I really hope we're proved wrong. I really hope that every train runs faultlessly and every train runs on time, and that everyone gets where they want to go when they want to get there. But, you know, we live in the real world and things do go wrong occasionally. And it's going to be tight. It's going to be really tight if there are, you know, disruptions to the service, be that a breakdown or whatever. And I would not like to see that detract from the experience that passengers on this line will have. The campaign walks this tightrope between being, you know, concerned advocates and being, you know, probably the most critical friends of the line. And on the one hand, we want to see the best possible line built. On the other hand, we want to see as many people as possible use the line and get a good experience from using that. And there's a whole raft of reasons why that's the case. We would like to see more infrastructure that would alleviate a lot of fears. I appreciate that there isn't a bottomless pit of money, okay, but nevertheless, you know, the railway is being built to a budget, and, you know, I just wish that more could be installed right now, because I think it will be very expensive to install it at a later date. There's no reason, of course, why a well-engineered railway shouldn't be people-friendly. In fact, that's probably part of the designed infrastructure that's built in to be as people-friendly as possible. But I must admit, I do get the impression sometimes that the railway is being well-engineered for engineers, and that engineers think it's a great railway. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great experience for the people who use the railway. If, engineers say, well, if there's a delay, we'll take the flak for that. Okay, that's fine in engineering terms, but that doesn't give a good experience to someone who's stuck on a train not knowing when they're going to get home and see their kids. And I know that that's been expressed in public forum before, and I really wouldn't condone that sort of attitude, or that sort of attitude towards the line.
To get this level of investment, a transformational project, and just to start too. I mean, people should see this as the beginning of something, not the end as the trains start coming down the line. It's beginning, and a real chance for us to get more people and more investment into the region and build on this first line.
Fantastic opportunities available.
Yeah, huge opportunities. I mean, if you think about it, if you're a tourist coming into Edinburgh, what better to do than to come down to the beautiful Borders, the home of knitwear, with all our fantastic food products, with great people, especially on a steam train. Come down, you'll be able to see the National Tapestry, go and explore the Borders from here, but also for business. I mean, this is not just for tourists, nor is it just for commuters. What we're doing is getting an environment that's going to attract more business, which gets us better jobs, and it enables us to raise the standard of living in the Borders.
And to be fair, of course, the SNP have always been behind it. Alex Salmond has been like a little kid in the toy shop.
Well, the number of times he's spoken about this when I've been with him, he's so passionate about it. And, one of his last things he did before he stood down as First Minister was get the package of funding, the millions of pounds around the railway that brings all the different agencies together to make sure it is a success. Because it's not just a case of if you build it, they will come. You absolutely have to take this as just the first step in a journey to improving the local economy.
Now, Hoyk, of course, a lot of people wanting that to be very much part of the Borders Railway in a few years' time. We obviously know things don't happen overnight, but what is the process for that? Because that's something which you will no doubt be pushing for.
Yeah, it has to happen. That's why I say this is just the beginning. Even that, I mean that from a transport perspective too. So we need to get it on to Hoyk and through to Carlisle. And for me, as an MP down in Westminster, what a fantastic project for the UK government to get behind, for MPs in the north of England to get behind.
And how quickly, realistically, can we see this happening?
I don't know. You probably know better than me, but these things, you're right, they don't happen overnight. But what I don't want is a mentality of let's wait and see how successful this railway line is before we do anything else. No, let's not wait, because we know it's going to take years. You do a feasibility study, then you've got to identify the funds and then plan out the project, and it will take some time to put back in place. So let's not wait is my attitude. I think we need to demand it as soon as possible. We need to get the money set aside as soon as possible. And then, let's accelerate whatever timeline we're presented with.
I think we're going to see nothing less than a transport transformation. If you're somebody who uses the X95 bus from Gala to Edinburgh at the moment, it's taking you 83 minutes. The train's going to take as little as 50 minutes. It'll be much more comfortable, there'll be toilets, room to get up and stretch your legs. What a great way to get into town on the train. So that will be a transformation, and we've had this situation that since 1969 public transport from the Borders to Edinburgh has been slower than it was in 1910. Well, finally that's going to be ended. The other part of the dimension, of course, is people who currently drive into Edinburgh. And Tweed Bank, if we're talking about the Borders, Tweed Bank will be the primary park and ride station for people who want to leave their cars behind. In the peak hours, 54 to 60 minutes from Tweed Bank right to the centre of Edinburgh will be very attractive to motorists. So a lot to be attracted by there. Perhaps a bit less so in the off-peak hours when roads are not so congested. And that's one of the concerns about the fact that the consultants never looked at an express service from the Borders. They looked at a service which basically stopped at every station. rather than an express service, only stopping a few places in Midlothian and Edinburgh, and a separate inner suburban service from Gorebridge. They didn't look at that, we don't know why they didn't look at it, and that was a loss. However, when all's said and done, it will be a transport transformation. But of course, if you look back to the origins of this railway, it was always seen as an economic regeneration project after, continuing decline in the textiles industry, the closure of the two via systems plants. This was all about economic regeneration. And the railway will give people opportunities to access new work, new education opportunities in Midlothian and Edinburgh, and that will encourage more people to stay in the borders rather than leaving the borders to live and work elsewhere. And I think also, interestingly, despite the fact it was almost completely ignored in the original Scott Wilson feasibility study, is that tourism is going to be a big part of this railway. Now that's something that campaigners realised very, very early on, long before the promoters had got a handle on all this. So we've got a railway that will take you down, for example, adjacent to the National Mining Museum at Newton Station. We'll then take you on to Tweed Bank, only a mile from Sir Walter Scott's Abbotsford. We'll have the Great Tapestry of Scotland, almost adjacent to the station. Melrose is just a couple of miles down the road. And we'll see integrated tickets for train, plus connecting bus, plus entrance to these visitor centres. And I think that's going to bring an enormous number of people in from Edinburgh. Think of all the tourists who are in Edinburgh looking for something different to do. And there's a train that can take you in less than an hour down to the heart of the borders, and you have a really nice day out in a civilised form of transport. So I think that will work really well too. So we are going to see a transformation. It will change the borders, it's certainly changing the transport, and it will open up all kinds of opportunities that haven't been there for the last 45 years. Well, the whole issue of the way Galashicls has been developed, everybody's got their own views of that. The big supermarkets coming in and taking development away from the town centre. But to be fair, the new transport interchange that Scottish Borders Council are building in the centre of Gala, part of the idea of that is to pull the emphasis back towards the centre of Gala again. So you've got this. Some people might not find it an attractive building, but it's a building that will be very capable. It will have the bus stances. You'll have information about bus and rail. Only a short walk across the A7 on a colour light crossing to the railway station for the interchange with the railway. And as a result of campaigners' efforts, people will not have to wait more than 30 seconds to cross the road, whereas previously it was going to be 90 seconds. So I think we'll see a shift of emphasis in Galashicls back towards the centre and with the railway and the linked bus services spreading across the borders from there, very much part of that equation.
It is a real pleasure, and I feel greatly honoured to name this locomotive Madge Elliott MBE. All the more so as her purpose in life is the creation of railways, not their destruction. I wish my namesake a prosperous track-laying future which will bring joy and comfort to countless travellers. Thank you.
Well, today marks really the completion of construction work in the Borders Railway, and we felt it was appropriate to mark that by honouring some of the people who have campaigned over the years to bring the railway back to life, and no one came to mind more strongly than Madge Elliott. Her involvement goes right back to the closure of the line in 1969. She's campaigned actively for bringing the line back to the Borders. So it was great to have the chance to name this locomotive after her today.
Quite honestly, I feel a wee bit flabbergasted. This happening. Yes, it's what an honour, really.
I suppose it marks the passing of time and your efforts over so many years to get us to where we are today, but also this is a sign of what is still to come, I suppose, with the first trains about to start running down the new line.
Yes, I'm pleased for the Borders folk, really, to be able to see that they can get onto a train again and into the city, you know. Yeah, and it takes you into central Edinburgh. It's not as if they're going to have to look for a car park, you know, if they come by train.
Does your work stop here though? Because it goes down as far as Tweed Bank, and I know you'd be very passionate to see it heading down to Hawick and further down to Carlisle to replace what used to be there.
Well, as I always say, if the Hawick folk want it, they'll have to get up and shout for it. They'll have to do something about it themselves. Yes. They're kind of bad for saying everything goes to Galway. Well, it's up to them to fight for the train if they wanted to come to Hawick.
Kim, I mean, this is a hugely proud moment for you yourself as well, and I mean the Waverley line means as much to you as it does for your mum, because it in some ways brought you both very much together.
Yeah, the late 60s and the early 70s I was certainly a railway enthusiast, and I got about a bit. I learned to tell the time before I went to primary school with the trains, because we lived quite close to the railway line going south from Hawick up the gradient, and we had the steam trains going up the gradient, pulling freight trains, and quite often there was a banker in the back, so I learned to tell the time, and it's been quite a significant thing in my life, yeah.
Today has been a case of an opportunity to reflect on the past, but very much a forward-thinking feeling in the station today.
Yes. I mean, I'm sure the border folk will take great advantage of the transport that's being provided by rail. Yes. I mean, to travel by road nowadays, by car, it's parking spaces, whereas come by rail, you're into central Edinburgh. It's wonderful.